What a week. Football is back. I am so overstimulated by new information that I could hardly focus enough to make this video. And frankly, I've got about a million trades to send out in my Dynasty League. So you're lucky that I showed up at all. But today I'm going to break down the most important developments from week one from a Dynasty standpoint. My name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. Let's get into it. Now, if you want to help me hit my goal of 3,000 subscribers, I would be incredibly grateful to you. It's just a little button down there under the video if you want to click that for me. And also leave a comment. What's your biggest takeaway from NFL week one? Oh, and I have not forgotten about the all-in subscription giveaway to fantasypoints.com. I'm going to be announcing that at the end of the video. But for now, let's jump into week one. And I want to start with the good stuff, the players that surpassed our expectations, that excited us, brought us joy this weekend. And I have to start with an early victory lap. I mean, where would we be in this industry without a good old-fashioned week one victory lap? And I'm going to take one on Brock Bowers. In my video last week, I predicted that Brock Bowers would end the season as the Dynasty tight end one, and he's certainly well on his way with this week one performance, especially with so many of the other elite tight ends dudding out in week one. In his first career game, Bowers led his team in target share at 24%. He caught 6 of his 8 targets for 58 yards, which I understand that's not necessarily lighting the world on fire, but I did think it was a really impressive first game, especially for a tight end where it's a position you traditionally take some time to get acclimated. He's hitting the ground running, and that's still with him splitting some snaps with Michael Mayer, not necessarily running all of the routes yet. So I think there's a lot of room to grow. I think the ceiling for him is incredibly high just based on what a good athlete he is. And I'm going to send out another round of offers for him this week, like very aggressive offers, especially in tight end premium leagues where I think he can legitimately, be a difference maker, give you an edge over your league mates. I've got him ranked pretty aggressively in Dynasty, like right in the same tier with Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. I would happily trade players like Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, Brandon Ayuk, those types of guys for him. So I don't know. I'm just really excited about Brock Bowers. Loved his week one performance. Another young player who balled out in week one was Jaden Reed. He had a fantastic game Friday night in Brazil, really tore up the Eagles secondary, my Eagles secondary, 4 catches, 138 yards and a touchdown. He added another touchdown on a 33-yard end around play. Just a really electric player. You can just see it, when he has the ball in his hands. He's got talent. He's got a lot of talent. And I hate to be the guy that has to kind of pump the brakes or rain on the parade a little bit with a young player, but I do think that Jaden Reed has a bit of a glass ceiling on his dynasty value. So I fully think his dynasty value should rise off of this performance. He deserves to be moved up rankings, but I do think there's a limit to his actual upside. He ran just 28 of a possible 37 routes. He's just really only getting on the field in 11 personnel, and that's just not the type of role that I think is ever going to give you like wide receiver one upside. Yes, in a given week, he can obviously explode, but sustained production, over a season, over multiple seasons, I'm just not sure if he's that guy. I do think this might be a sell high opportunity with Jaden Reed. Not that he's never going to have good games, but he is looking at a backup quarterback for the next month at least. And again, I don't think he can do stuff like this, week in and week out. I would like to trade him right now. I would either use him to try and upgrade into like a legitimate superstar wide receiver. You see what you can add to Jaden Reed to get into a Malik Neighbors or an AJ Brown type of wide receiver, or maybe tear down to some lower end wide receiver too and try to bank a first round pick in value, something like that. Another year 2 wide receiver that had a big game this past week was Rashee Rice. He played back on Thursday against the Ravens, and he kind of silenced any of the doubters that were still remaining, people that were skeptical of his run to end last season. It really reminds me of the Amon-Ra St. Brown story arc of like coming on really strong late in the rookie season. A lot of people are skeptical that it's sustainable because the competition wasn't good and his role was maybe a little bit gimmicky. And then he just comes out in week one. He's just flat out the wide receiver one for this team. 9 targets. No one else had more than 4. He ran the most routes. He had the most snaps. He is the wide receiver one for the Chiefs ahead of Travis Kelce at this point. He's the main guy there. Now, back in August, I tweeted, without using the word suspension, tell me why Rashee Rice shouldn't be going next to or ahead of DK Metcalf and DJ Moore in drafts, which that tweet got over 200 replies, and most of those people were just telling me I'm an idiot. So feels pretty good to see Rice come out in week one and do that. You can nitpick his game all you want and say that he's a limited player. He doesn't run a full route tree, but he does some things extremely well. Like he's Liam Neeson in Taken. He has a very particular set of skills. And the great thing is that the Chiefs offense is well designed and knows how to maximize those skills. He had 7 catches for 103 yards in a game that Patrick Mahomes only threw 28 passes. So I think he's going to have a very good year. I think these types of games are just going to continue. And he's a player you can possibly still even get less than he should be valued, because I think there's some anchoring bias where people are going to stick to his offseason cost and not adjust quickly enough to what we've learned. But I think he's a borderline wide receiver 1 in Dynasty at this point. And then the last of the truly exciting week 1 performances that I want to touch on was Isaiah Likely. I really can't wrap my head around this game. It just wasn't something that was even in the range of outcomes for me. I wasn't really on Isaiah Likely in best ball, wasn't a guy I was targeting in Dynasty necessarily. And he's just flat out a starter for the Ravens. And that's something I just didn't foresee. You hear about teams talking about this, like making a second tight end a starter or using a running back in the slot. But these teams never do it. They always fall back on the same old 11 personnel type offenses. But the Ravens actually did it. Good for them, because their wide receiver 3 is Nelson Aguilar. And they thought, you know what? Isaiah Likely gives us a better chance to win when he's on the field. And they didn't win, but he certainly showed that he's a valuable playmaker for this team, and he's not going to go away. So what he did in that Thursday night game is he caught 9 passes on 12 targets for over 100 yards and a touchdown. He had that one really awesome downfield yards after catch play. And then outside of that, it was a ton of this underneath stuff where he was running all these routes close to the line of scrimmage. The Kansas City pass rush was really giving Lamar headaches. And so he had to get the ball out quick, and Likely was the beneficiary of that. So I do think to some degree, the game script was really conducive to a big game for Isaiah Likely. But at the same time, he had an excellent performance. And I suspect that there will be more big games for him in the future. We're going to touch on Mark Andrews in a second, but with Likely, I'm happy to send out a second for him in really any league, especially in tight end premium. When you see a young player have a game like this, especially one that's had some success in the past, has gotten a lot of praise from the coaching staff, I think you should pay attention to things like this. And it's better to overreact than underreact. So I think sending out seconds for him is a good idea. It's going to get rejected in some leagues. I suspect it will be accepted in some where people are playing it more cautiously, or they don't want to, put too much stock into this one game performance. But I think we should put some stock into it, and he's not going away. But on the other side of it, we can get into some of the concerning performances here. Mark Andrews, one of the absolute duds of the whole weekend, right? 2 catches for 14 yards in a game where Lamar Jackson attempts 41 passes, total negative game script. I mean, it should have been perfect for him to rack up receptions, and he just wasn't in the plan. Or at least if he was in the plan went horribly awry. And I think that's really more of what happened. The pass rush was too much to handle. The Baltimore offensive line really struggled, and Lamar could not get to these downfield reads. He couldn't get to these intermediate routes that Andrews was running. And at the same time, he was being double covered constantly. He was being bracketed throughout the game. There was a thread from Andy Holloway that I thought was really good. It went really in depth on every single one of Andrews' opportunities, basically. I'll put a link to that in the description. But the short summary is basically that Andrews played well. He was creating separation. He was just not running the types of routes that Lamar was able to get to in that game. He got kind of phased out. Sometimes that happens. Amon-Ra St. Brown on Sunday Night Football had kind of a similar situation where he just wasn't the focal point. More balls went to Jamison Williams, more went to Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, and Amon-Ra had a quiet day. It just happens even with the best players. So I'm not worried that Mark Andrews is washed. And at this point, I'd be more inclined to send out low ball trade offers for him than to try to panic sell and get him off my teams. I think more likely than not, he is still a top 5 fantasy tight end. The next concerning performance I want to talk about is Rachaad White. And I know what you're going to say. He had 16 PPR points. He had 21 touches. He had 100 yards. How can you say that's a concerning performance? First of all, he only played 69% of the snaps, which is actually still a decently high number for a running back, but it's lower than almost any game he played last season. So right off the bat, he looks like less of a full-blown workhorse than last year. And then you look at this rushing performance, 15 carries for 31 yards, 2.1 yards per carry. This has been a problem for Rachaad White since he entered the league. He has not been even an average rusher in any of his NFL seasons. He's been among the worst rushers in the league every year of his career. It's just not in this guy's skill set. He's a good pass catcher. He is not a good rusher. Meanwhile, you look at Bucky Irving in his first career game as a 4th-round rookie. He plays 34% of the snaps. He gets 9 carries, takes those for 62 yards. That's a 6.9 yards per carry average, kind of a stark contrast to Rachaad White. And then he gets 3 targets as well. He had 1 short yardage carry. So he was being deployed in certainly a smaller role than White, but he was being used in just about all facets of the game when he was on the field. So I view this as a very concerning performance for Rachaad White because now he has competition behind him. It didn't matter last year that he was awful as a rusher because they couldn't turn to anyone else. They weren't going to give the ball to Chase Edmonds or Sean Tucker because those guys are awful too. But Bucky Irving has played 1 game. He looks good. He's gotten praise all offseason from the coaching staff. He was incredibly elusive in college. It just seems to me like this is going to trend more and more and more towards a true split where, yeah, of course, Rachaad White's going to have his role as a pass catcher, but from where he's been valued, where like you can still get first round picks for him in a lot of leagues, that's incredibly fragile to me. We could look up 3 weeks from now and he could have, half the dynasty value. He could be going where like Jalen Warren is going. So I would definitely be looking to sell Rachaad White. He is one of my biggest priority sells after this week. Now, I didn't have a lot of Rachaad White to begin with in Dynasty, so that performance, while it did concern me, it did not rattle me to my core. However, Drake London catching 2 passes for 15 yards, that made me feel some things because I have Drake London in a ton of my Dynasty leagues, and I have been scrambling for answers. Why is this happening? Drake London is good. I know that he's good. How is he getting out targeted by Ray McLeod of all people? I think I figured that out. And I don't think it's as bad as it looks on the surface. So let's talk about Drake London's game. Played against the Steelers. It was a super ugly game. They lost like 18-10. Kirk Cousins was atrociously bad. And Drake London was bad as well. 11.5% target share, 0.65 yards per out run. Truly depressing stuff. However, here's some things you should know. 1, he played every single snap for the Falcons. He did not leave the field. So that's good. He's not in any kind of a weird Arthur Smith rotation anymore. And Kyle Pitts isn't either, by the way. He played almost every snap as well. So that's good news. The other thing to note is that the Steelers pass rush, specifically TJ Watt, was just absolutely terrorizing Kirk Cousins in this game. It was kind of similar to the Ravens game where like every passing play just sort of defaulted to this underneath stuff. Bijan Robinson got a ton of targets. Ray McLeod was getting these like schemed looks close to the line of scrimmage. So that's a big part of it, I think. It's just the Steelers had a good defensive game plan. It was a mismatch with the Falcons. And then you have this tweet from Hayden Winks who says, I watched every Falcons drop back. That was the least I've seen a quarterback move in a game ever. Not an exaggeration. He broke the tackle box just once, I think. No play action, no under center, just 3 to 5 step drops and pray there is no pressure. It's more of a Cousins issue, I think, than a London issue, which still affects London, obviously, because we want him to have better quarterback play. But I think the hope is just that Cousins can regain a little bit more mobility as he gets further removed from this injury. And then in the meantime, the Falcons can do a little bit of a better job of actually planning around this weakness in their quarterback. And hopefully they don't play a pass rush as good as the Steelers every week. That being said, I'm tempering my expectations for London a little bit. Like maybe we're not going to get the massive wide receiver 1 type of breakout season, but I definitely think better days are ahead. And I don't think he's someone you need to be panicking and selling off right now in your dynasty leagues. Another performance that I guess you could categorize as concerning was Adonai Mitchell. I'm not quite sure how high the expectations were for him being a rookie wide receiver in his first game, but if you look at the box score, it was awful. He had 5 targets, he had 1 reception for 2 yards. The good news is that there's a lot more than just the box score in this case, and I was actually really encouraged with what I saw from Adonai Mitchell. First of all, he ran 18 routes compared to 20 for Alec Pierce and 21 for Michael Pittman. So full-time player right out of the gate. Obviously, Josh Downs being out, that plays a role here, but they trusted him to run almost all the routes. He was also second on the team in targets with 5, which was actually good for a 26% target share because Anthony Richardson only attempted 19 passes. And Mitchell was wide open on 2 deep touchdowns that were just barely overthrown. I mean, almost touched his fingertips. They were so close. Now, those are things he's going to have to deal with moving forward. Low passing volume, occasionally inaccurate throws. But for one thing, the Colts ran very few plays this past week. I think that's going to be an anomaly. I think they're going to run more plays overall, and that's still going to lead to more pass attempts. And then the other thing is, just accuracy, rapport, chemistry, like that stuff should improve over the course of the season. So I'm inclined to send out some offers for Mitchell this week, see if anybody's worried about the Colts, worried about Anthony Richardson, and just wants to kind of jump ship on Mitchell. I wasn't in on him earlier this offseason, but now I think is the time that I'd be willing to acquire him. And the last in the concerning performance category, another player that I'm pretty heavily invested in Dynasty is Chris Olave. I mean, is there anything more annoying than when a team absolutely lights up the scoreboard And then you look and your player, the one you have on their team, who happens to be the best offensive player on that team, just hasn't done anything. I mean, I was just pulling my hair out, looking back, seeing the Saints have 40 points and Chris Olave's got 2 catches for 11 yards. It didn't even make sense how this was possible. But after looking into it a little bit more, I'm mostly willing to just chalk this one up to variance and game script. You know, they were never trailing. This game was never in doubt. They just didn't need Chris Olave in this game. And, you know, we see this sometimes with star players. They just have these duds out of nowhere. It's just when they happen in the first week of the season, and that's the only data point that we do have a tendency to really freak out. It's not that we shouldn't care at all, but I think if Olave had a strong start to the season and then this happened in like week 6, nobody would care. So I still think there's a chance that this doesn't matter, that he just totally bounces back and it's fine. And the other thing is that this Saints offense looks a lot different now. And that could be a good thing for Chris Olave in upcoming weeks. So Jacob Gibbs on Twitter pointed out the Saints went from dead last in both pre-snap motion and play action to first in pre-snap motion and third in play action. That's a big change to the offense, and that should really help the passing game. And we saw that. The passing game was incredibly efficient this past week. They just didn't have to throw that much. And again, the passes weren't directed toward Olave. But I still think they're going to be in the future. I think he's the most talented receiver they have. And I'm looking forward to some big games down the road. Now let's finish this thing up by talking about 2 backfields that we have a little bit more clarity on heading into week 2. The first is the Bengals backfield, where we were clearly just bamboozled by beat writers who told us that Chase Brown was the RB1 for this team. Zach Moss is the RB1 for this team as it stands today. He split the early down work with Chase Brown pretty much evenly, and then he took the long down and distance. He took the goal line stuff. So basically, you know, most of the stuff that matters. So if you're starting either of these guys moving forward, I think it's got to be Zach Moss. I mean, this thing could change. It's certainly a fluid situation, and Chase Brown could force his way into a larger role. But honestly, as it stands, I would sell either player for a second round pick, and I would just try to reinvest that into a running back in a backfield that I feel better about. And then I also want to talk about the Cowboys running backs, because I think there's actually going to be a little bit of a misconception after this week 1 game that Zeke is the clear RB1 for this team. For the box score watchers, people that weren't watching the game live, which that was me, I wasn't watching it live at the time, I was thinking, okay, clearly this is Zeke's backfield. Dowdle's more of a handcuff piece, change of pace guy. But no, that's not really the case. They actually were rotating drives throughout the game. So Zeke took the first drive, so you can call him the starter. Dowdle took the second drive. Zeke took the third. Dowdle took the fourth. This continued throughout the game. And on Dowdle's drives, he did play his own third downs. He played his own short yardage. The reason Zeke got the goal line touch is because he was in on the drive where they got to the goal line. I guess it's possible that they would pull Dowdle and put Zeke in at the goal line on his drives, but we have no evidence of that because Dowdle didn't get pulled for anything else. So I think this is just going to be more of a frustrating split where like you could start either one of these guys in a pinch and just hope it's their week to fall into the end zone, or that their drives just go further and they get more carries. But right now there's no clear RB1 between the two of them. And I still think Dowdle is the one that would be more likely to emerge down the stretch as the true RB1 for the Cowboys. I mean, it's probably neither of them. They probably just split the work all season, but at least with Dowdle, you have the benefit of some youth, some level of unknown upside where he could potentially prove himself to be the better player. Now, there's obviously so much more that happened in week 1. I just tried to pick out the most important, the most actionable stuff, the stuff I had strong opinions about. If you want more week 1 content from me, consider becoming a YouTube member. You can hit that join button down at the bottom. That's going to give you access to weekly live streams that I do for YouTube members. And I'll be breaking down a lot more of the week 1 action later this week in my weekly live stream. And you can also get access to my top 200 Dynasty rankings, which are going to be updated weekly throughout the season. And I think that's really helpful to have during the season, just sort of this baseline understanding of player value, because once points start being scored and situations start changing, it can all feel very nebulous at times. And it's good to just have something you can look back on as a reference. So I do offer those rankings. I do the weekly live streams if you want to consider signing up for YouTube membership. Now, as promised, it is time to give away an all-in subscription to fantasypoints.com. That's a $420 value. And the winner of the giveaway is Biggs 1981. Congratulations on your big win. To claim your prize, jump into the Pure Potential Discord and just send me a direct message. Or if you need to, you can send me an email at purepotentialff@gmail.com. Just try to reach out in the next 7 days or so, and we'll make sure to get you set up with that all-in subscription. Thank you guys so much for watching. Good luck out there in week 2, and I will see you in the next one.